1 in every 7 of us live with a disability, making up the world's biggest minority group. Disability impacts everybody.
The disability community is one of the only minority group that anybody can join at any point in their life.
So why are disabled people twice as likely to be unemployed, underrepresented in media, and still facing widespread discrimination?
You control how people see me.
Talk to us and with us, not about us and for us.
It's a huge problem, but there is a solution. We are the Valuable 500, and we are driving system change through the leaders of the most powerful force on the planet, business.
Through our partnership with the Valuable 500, we have an incredible opportunity and responsibility to move the world forward for all.
Because CEOs can do in days what governments can only hope to achieve in years. We've built a global collective of 500 CEOs and their companies who have committed to change for people with disabilities.
The overall goal is very simply not leaving anybody behind.
How are we working explicitly and specifically with disabled people?
We represent 22 million employees in 41 countries across 64 industries, including the world's biggest brands. And when the Valuable 500 companies work together, the power of change multiplies through their employees, customers, supply chains, and beyond. There is power in collective action. Simple acts done multiples of times by hundreds of companies can and will change the way we do business. We are working to ensure disabled people get into work and are supported to rise and lead, have access to products and services, appear in front of and behind the camera.
Hire other disabled people. You and whatever project you are working on will be better for having done so.
Coda!
We will gain direct insight from the disabled community.
I do need help. Sometimes I'll break on, but always so close in the first place.
And gather disability data on a global scale.
To use that data to spotlight the issue and drive change.
With our CEOs leading through their personal connections and experience.
All of us have a disability of some sort. I think we need to celebrate those differences.
Together, we are building a world that includes everybody. So no matter who you are part of our story. We are the Valuable 500, and disability is our business. Disability is all of our business.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bella Webb. I'm the Sustainability Editor at Vogue Business. I am a white woman in my mid-20s. I have dark brown hair, skin I was recently told is as pale as mozzarella cheese, and a long flowery dress. Today we are talking about disability inclusion, addressing the challenges and showcasing the triumphs. Now, imagine getting stuck in a dress because you can't reach the zip at the back, or because there are too many fiddly buttons to undo by yourself. Imagine the indignity of having to sleep in that dress overnight. It isn't a direct comparison, but activists say this is as close as many able-bodied people will come to understanding how disabled people experience fashion. For all its talk of diversity and inclusion, the fashion industry has been slow to embrace adaptive design, which is clothing that was designed for people with varying needs and physical mobility. Today, we'll be discussing the challenges and opportunities in adaptive fashion, from the granular details that make an item accessible to the systems and design practices holding the industry back from being inclusive to all. We have a brilliant panel joining us today. I'll let everyone introduce themselves in turn. So, Pascale, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. I'm Pascale Montaner. I'm the Global Brand Marketing and Communication Head at Geiger, based in London. I am a white woman who tends to say that she's 29, but she's way, way, way older than that. I have dark hair. I have tan skin because I come back from a holiday. I'm wearing a black suit with lovely crystal embroidery detail. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you. Okay, Victoria.
Hello, thank you everybody. My name is Victoria Jenkins. I'm the founder of Unhidden. I'm in my mid-30s and I'm wearing a power blue suit with a white top and white trainers, and I have red lipstick on and mid-length brown hair.
And the first of our Carolines.
Oh, yes. Hello, Caroline. I'm Caroline Casey. I'm the troublemaker and founder behind the Valuable 500. I am a woman who is 50, owning it and loving it. White woman from Ireland with very white blonde hair, very dark black rimmed glasses. I love colour. So I'm wearing a very ridiculous orange coloured jacket, pale blue trousers, gold boots, love the 1970s. And what you can't see about me, and this is why audio description is so important, I have a condition called ocular albinism. I am registered blind, and I cannot see clearly within about a foot of myself. So everybody's as beautiful as they could be on this panel.
Thank you. And our next Caroline.
I'm Caroline Rush, and I'm Chief Executive of the British Fashion Council. I am a woman and recently turned 51. I always believe I'm the tallest person in the room. I think it's a hang-up from childhood. And have got sort of mid, needs a haircut, probably slightly longer, dark hair than I normally have.
Amazing. And finally, we're going to be coming to you, Geoffrey.
So hi, I am Geoffrey Williams, the Global Vice President of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at Burberry. I am a black man with no hair. I lost it many years ago, very sad times. Dressed all in blue today, randomly, and wearing black rimmed glasses, and I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Now, we're going to start with the challenges. So, Victoria, I'll come to you first. Research has shown that there are more clothing lines for dogs than there are for disabled people, which is an incredibly shocking statistic. What advice can you offer for up-and-coming designers trying to get their foot in the door?
For up-and-coming designers, I think there needs to be bringing disabled people into the room. So a lot of their challenge is going to be the fact that a lot of fashion institutions are not accessible. We're not encouraging that community to go and study fashion in the first place. And the famous phrase for us is nothing about us without us. So any new designer wanting to be more inclusive has got to be consulting with not just wheelchair users, people with neurodivergency, people with sight loss, people with cochlear implants. It covers so many things. And I think the other challenge that people have to accept is it's the world's largest marginalised group. It can affect anyone at any time. It helps to underline it. I think some people forget this part, especially when we do so much around DEI inclusion, is that the LGBTQIA plus community, 40% have a disability. And we think how far we've come with Pride. It's still a very long way to go, but we're even further behind when it comes to Pride events being accessible. So I think for designers, they have to think about us to include us, but they definitely have to bring us into the room. Otherwise, it's not meaningful. And it's not to say that non-disabled designers can never design for people with disabilities. They absolutely can. But they can't do it without consulting people in the short term.
And can you just tell us a little bit at Unhidden about what that process looks like? What are the kind of tangible steps that you put in place to make sure there are a diverse array of disabled people in the room and in that process?
I mean, it's been 6 years in the making. I asked everybody, across social media. I asked people that I met in hospital. Every opinion, it all got filed away or written down somewhere. And it starts, you start with the design. What do you want it to look like? And then you start to build in all the different access points. And some of it is really, really easy. It could just be an elasticated waistband for people who have a stoma in a pair of tailored trousers. It's not very difficult. We're not reinventing the wheel. And then some of it is just, they are pattern changes, but once they're done, they're done.
I think that's what people forget as well, that adaptive fashion doesn't have to be an entirely new system way of designing. It can be small tweaks. These are things that any designer can change. Anyone can make their clothing more accessible.
Yeah, and there's so many things that are accidentally adaptive anyway, but there's also, you can take your best sellers, if you're a big brand or company, take your best sellers and then add that in, because what you're doing, especially if you use universal design, you're not stopping anybody wearing it, you're allowing much more people to take part.
Now, coming back to the stats a little bit, we know that 15 to 20% of the UK's population has a visible or non-visible disability, which equates to around 14 million people. But despite this, research shows that disabled people make up only 0.01% of those featured in fashion and beauty advertising. Pascale, I'll come to you next. What action can brands take to increase representation?
I think brands can invite people with disabilities in their campaigns. For example, at Geiger, we launched a campaign called People Empowered in September 2020. And it provides the opportunity for people who have previously been underrepresented, a platform for them to share their experience, share their story, and educate consumers about the misconceptions and the lack of representation in the industry. To give you an idea, in this campaign, which is an ongoing campaign, so it's still happening 2 years later, where we're celebrating incredible individuals, about 25% of them actually that we have celebrated have disabilities. Then, visibility, as we all know, is paramount to, alter biases, alter opinions. And I think we all have the responsibility to use that visibility to change perception. And I will say also it's to try to invite people with disabilities in your leadership teams. So for instance, this week we have just launched our charity, Kurt Geiger Kindness Foundation. And through People Empowered, we had the opportunity to meet Bernadette Haggans, who I know you know really, really well. And when we started thinking about, okay, we really want to, be more committed with, our initiative in social impact, we really wanted to make sure that Bernadette will be part of our board, and she's one of our independent trustees. So she's been working with us behind the scene to launch the foundation this week. She is with us in all the discussions, and we actually are learning so much from her, but also by having her with us, she can help us shatter the glass ceiling that people with disabilities encounter.
And for everyone watching at home, who is Bernadette? Tell us a bit more. So
Bernadette Haggans, she's an Irish model. She's in her 20s. She basically had a very severe cancer that basically made it that she had her leg amputated. And she is a model with her prosthetic leg, which she celebrates, and she really it's part of her self-expression. She basically went, and I don't want to speak for her, but I remember it's been so inspirational and it's been such an eye-opener when I met her, over 2 years ago, when, she said, when the doctors were trying to basically, encourage me to wear a prosthetic leg, which was skin color, I was like, no, I don't have that leg anymore. I want to be a robot girl. And she has that force, she has that drive. She really advocates for young people with disabilities, people who actually, suffer from cancer. She has that energy and that can-do attitude, which basically can give the confidence to anyone to drive and push change. And it's actually through People Empowered that also I got the opportunity to discover Valuable 500. And again, we learned so much, and it gave us first of all, it's like, okay, we need to do something about it. So because, I think there is personal responsibility, and there are societal expectations as well. So I think we have to meet and respond to that. And if you don't have the confidence or you don't know where to start, by speaking to organizations like Valuable 500, you definitely then, you can be empowered and say, okay, I want to do something about it.
Yeah, everyone has the opportunity to enact change. It's just about approaching it with openness and curiosity and being willing to learn and make mistakes along the way. Now, Caroline Rush, you kind of have an overview of the fashion industry from where you sit with the British Fashion Council. What do you think are the main barriers to fashion becoming fully inclusive?
Well, over the last couple of years, we've done quite a lot of work around diversity and inclusion. And one of the first things that became very evident is that there's very little data within the industry about the workforce. I think, Pascale's touched on fantastic marketing campaigns and looking at increasing representation in the imagery that we see. And that's a brilliant start, but actually full inclusivity means changing the workforce as well, because then you get diversity of thought. There are lots of benefits to that. I'm sure Geoffrey's going to talk about it. Diverse workforces are much more successful, tend to be much more successful businesses than those that aren't. And so we need to address that. And we did some research recently with the MBS group, looking at large European organisations to really understand what their diversity and inclusion programmes were. And there were I think over 50% of them had D&I programs. Some were, thinking about it, developing them. So there's a huge piece of work to be done there in terms of just the number of programs embedded within organisations. But equally, because they were so early stages, that the benefits of those programs aren't necessarily being seen yet. So, the transition for the fashion industry to have a fully inclusive and diverse workforce has some way to go. I think the brilliant thing is that particularly in the UK, we are known for having so many, start-up, young designer businesses. And in so many senses, these new businesses are pushing our industry to change. So whether that's through a lens of sustainability or diversity and inclusion, is that what had been the norm before can't be the norm for the future. And so we're seeing a lot of, start-up businesses, early stages, that are really challenging those norms. And because of that, we're seeing more adaptive clothing businesses coming through. And I suspect because of that, some of the larger brands are then thinking about building adaptive clothing or adaptive practices into some of the collections that they have. So we've got a long way to go. From our part, we have, certainly, we've got internal programs that are really looking at addressing everything from how we view those that receive the grants through the British Fashion Council, making sure that we've got programs for individuals to make sure that they can just complete the forms properly, that they've got support to do that. We have an external D&I working group that is looking at things around careers and growth programs in the regions throughout the UK to look at how collectively in the industry we can look at being much more inclusive. And the next thing is looking at a benchmarking tool. There isn't one in the fashion industry, so how do we start getting some of that data? How do we start celebrating those businesses that are doing great work that will in itself help other businesses rise as they see where they need to be in a war for talent that we have in our industry at the moment?
And fashion, as we know, is such a global and sprawling industry, and a single business is never really a single business. There are thousands, sometimes millions of people involved in each one. Caroline, Casey, why is it so important for fashion businesses to embrace diversity throughout their supply chains?
Well, would it be okay if I just start with something that's connected to this title, The Challenges and the Triumphs? Can
Absolutely.
we just for a second acknowledge who's sitting in this panel? And this would not have happened several years ago. We have Vogue, Geiger, Unhidden, the Valuable 500 Troublemakers, the British Council, and then also Burberry. So in this moment, why is it so important throughout the business? What we are seeing here is the business of fashion. And it is so powerful to every point made, is what we see and what we hear as a society we respond to. So if we're not there, visibly in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the business, we are disappeared. And just to give some more stats here, it's 1.3 billion currently who live with a disability. And with a mother and a father, we're talking 54% of our global economy today, which is representative of 13 trillion. There is no industry in the world that can ignore that, okay? So when we look at the supply chain and the power of the industry that you represent,
If we see for a second, Nielsen did a piece of work saying 450,000 ad campaigns, only 1% had anything to do with disability. Now, how are you attracting or getting that market? I'm going to look here at Victoria. Next week in Fashion Week, we are going to have 250 clothing lines going to, and designers. Victoria is the only person who got in touch with Zebedee to use models who have lived experience. That's how we can connect it. It's not just what we see in front of the camera, it's how you use your power as brands to who you work with. You will do business, Burberry, with people of the same values that you have. And that is how we can see systemic change, and that's the exciting part. Burberry and Geiger and Gucci have done brilliant campaigns, and that's been fantastic because you see the front end of that. But who are they working with behind the scenes to make that happen? To your point, who's in the business? Where's the data? So it's not just the brand, it's not just the company, but who are they working with? Are they determining that every time I sit on a panel, it has to have captioning? Fashion shows, are they accessible? Then we start looking at systemic change, and that's the exciting part. There's no point having visible campaigns if people with disabilities can't get into the fashion shows or get into the shops. And as a visually impaired person, can I just tell you, it's really hard seeing things in a shop. So when people are trained to, when I say, can you help me? And they just go, point over there. And I go, no, I'm registered blind. They go, oh, let me help you. Then they're going to get my business. So that's how the powerful change can happen.
Victoria, you were just telling me earlier that when you do your show at London Fashion Week, that's going to be in the Kurt Geiger showroom because you struggled to find an accessible space.
Yeah, well, I mean, not just for the audience, which, you know, obviously for my show, there's going to be a high proportion of disability within the audience, but I've got 23 models, all of whom have various different access needs. So most of, you know, London is famously not very accessible, but to try and put it on a show where everyone's got privacy to get changed, there are hoists involved, and then for them to be able to go out and be the best version of themselves. It is a challenge, but it can absolutely be done. I think you just have to have that process in place to know what accessibility looks like, because it's not just ramps. You know, we've got a quiet room, which is fantastic that Kurt Geiger are providing, that private changing area, all the things that people need to just be able to enjoy the experience as being a model, and that the guests can enjoy it as well.
I was interviewing Sinead Burke recently, who's a wonderful advocate for disability rights and a little person herself. And we were talking about the accessibility of shops on Regent Street, which many of those shops are listed buildings. And she said this wonderful and kind of profound thing, which was, at what point are we going to start putting people before architecture? And that really struck me because so much of the fashion system, which is maybe an element we don't often think about, exists within buildings. And buildings are part of the systems in which we all live our lives. And it's kind of about challenging, well, who are those buildings built for? Who is able to access those buildings? And then you start extending the metaphor from buildings to spaces, to workplaces. And then you start to realize that this world was not built to be inclusive to everybody.
No. And there's another little stat in there as well, that the UK high street loses £267 million a month because it's not accessible and it doesn't sell adaptive products. I think, you know, in a time of everyone's still trying to grow as businesses, I think to ignore this huge market, I mean, just from a human rights point of view, is terrible.
And
but
then
also
you look at accessibility online. So it's the physical building and then
buildings.
online, how accessible. Do we know that a third of our FTSE 100 companies, just even outside fashion, are still inaccessible? I mean, how much money are you losing? You know, it's absolutely crazy. And to the point of inclusive design, to your point about architecture, who were building design for all of those, you know, decades ago? So it's inclusive design. It's who are we designing our clothes for, our offices for? It's for everyone. It needs to be reflective of society, not just a niche market.
There's a wonderful e-commerce retailer that's just started that I want to shout out here as well, called Adaptista. And they have built in some incredible features in their website, which is all about making it accessible to all. They work on the principles of universal design. And it's even the tiniest little details, like rounding the edges of images and not having overstimulating homepages with flashing videos and loud sounds everywhere and loud colors even. It's, you know, once you start down this process, you realize how much there is to change. And that's one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities. Now, Geoffrey, I want to come to you next, because Burberry is a company that was not started with disabled consumers in mind, but you are now beginning to think about it and kind of retrofit that. How have you approached the challenge of becoming a more inclusive organisation and actually better understanding the needs of your customers?
We've done that with a lot of listening. So firstly, listening to our people that work within our organisation and getting them to kind of tell the stories and the things that they think that we should be doing, and creating the moment to kind of take that listening from them and kind of find the right partners externally. So we're obviously also part of the Valuable 500. We've joined the British Diversity Forum, Disability Forum, sorry, and we've kind of been able to use these organisations to assess where we are and get to understand what are the things that we need to change. So everyone's kind of talk about, the website, the internal processes, our supply chain, and having those conversations with the relevant team. I think it's also getting the wider organisation to understand why it's important, because often we talk about it and we go, oh, it's a diversity and inclusion thing. Geoffrey, can you fix it? Yeah. And it's now actually going, let's go into the wider organisation and explain this is actually a business need, and we need to approach this in a way that actually informs how we approach our business and how we approach our consumers. I think you'll see that, we've kind of reached out to different agencies and our campaigns are a lot more inclusive. And that's also been a focused agenda of us kind of saying, how do we want to represent modern Britain and what does it actually look like now? And how do we approach that in our campaigns? So I think it starts with listening, but then also kind of having those multitude of conversations and getting everyone to understand that this is bigger than just the D&I team. It's a business need that we all need to kind of play a hand in.
Yeah, and I think I write about this a lot, this idea of the industry needing a value shift. And that's a really difficult thing to scale across an organisation, across a whole industry, actually changing the way that people think as individuals. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a bit more insight into how you go about that training that you mentioned? What does that look like?
So the training is effectively just, as I said, bringing in the different organisations that we've worked with and giving them the space and the platform to tell their story, explain what they're doing, kind of point out all the statistics that the guys have been speaking about of lost revenue and lost opportunities when we don't actually consider this community. I think it's also that piece of, I'm dyslexic, so how does that show up in the needs of our employees? What do we actually need to do from a capability standpoint to make sure that people can design, create, innovate in our organisation with the tools they need? So our health and safety teams are kind of making sure that we have all the various bits in places. And then I think from a consumer standpoint, we've been looking at the footprint of our stores and making sure that we understand which ones are accessible, which ones aren't, and kind of creating the space to be able to put some information on our website and in different places where we tell our story of how people can access our kind of buildings as well. And I think, it's been we're still at the start, we're still exploring, testing and learning, but it's that piece of really kind of bringing the story to life and getting our people to engage.
Yeah, and I suppose as well that visibility isn't just about visibility in ad campaigns and visibility of models, it's also about the changes that you're making and signposting to people that that's happening and that it's important to the business as well. The
why, the what and the how. Because I think sometimes, we have these conversations around inclusion and diversity, and it's kind of this warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart that one day we'll all get it right, and won't it be amazing? And it's kind of pushing everyone beyond that to say, no, you own this. Yeah. You play your part in making this change. Yeah. It's not just one person. It's all, 10,000 of us that work in this organisation. So if you see something, call it out. Bring it to the attention of the team. If you think that we should be doing something, let's have that conversation. So we have internal councils and lots of different networks that we're giving everyone that space to kind of bring those things to light. So, yeah.
We're going to move on now to the triumphs. We have many, many examples among the people on the stage today. Now, we are based in London. This will be aired during London Fashion Week. Victoria, who is the most progressive market and what can we learn from them? No pressure.
Just to say, it's not the UK. Sorry, I would actually say it's Australia. I think I was speaking to you earlier about some stats. The Australian government sets aside money for adaptive fashion, so people that need it in Australia don't pay for it. I think that's, therefore that's quite phenomenal. And there's a wonderful, the Australian Fashion Collective. Mm-hmm. They just put on a joint show, all the different brands all together. And I think that was really powerful and incredible. I would say this year, London Represents is showing at the same night as me, and they've got a number of my adaptive design colleagues. It's also on the same night as my show, so there's a bit of a clash. But that same evening, there's going to be so many people seeing this for the first time. So I think we're getting there, and we're doing it very creatively, and it's very organically growing in the UK. But Australia and even America are much further ahead. I think there's a online marketplace called Patty and Ricky in the States. It's got well over 100 designers that all do adaptive fashion. And they do sell some of the UK brands over there as well. So, and then we look at Every Human and Avery in Australia that are incredible. So, yeah, we've got quite a long way to go still. So it's really hard to say who's doing it the best because Australia, America, and then we are lagging quite far behind.
It's like with anything, though, there's no one person or one market who's doing it the best. There's people who have interesting initiatives, and then you kind of want to tie together all the threads, don't you? But yeah, I think this idea of setting aside money for adaptive clothing is a really interesting one.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, it's interesting because it does feed into this idea that it's charity.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And we don't want charity. We want the same choices as everybody else. I mean, I think when it comes to fashion, actually, the bigger issue, if you set aside representation, we've got to talk about the price points of accessible pricing. I know my range isn't currently because it's made to order and I don't use a sweatshop, so therefore the price point is obviously higher.
What is the price point?
So like one of the dresses, £90. And with a community 50% more likely to be in poverty, that is out of reach for some people. It's not everyone, also I can't speak for the entire disabled community, but not all disabled people live in poverty, obviously, but there's a greater need for the high street to adapt it, to adapt to adaptive fashion before high fashion brands. It would be wonderful to see Gucci throw a load of disabled models down a runway, but how much for them to do adaptive fashion, I don't know how important that would be because you've got to look at the price point and where the real need is.
But can I ask, so we know that by 2030, 60 to 80% of the wealth in the world is going to be in the hands of over 6-year-olds. Does that help push then this whole price point and the market that's going to exist for adaptive fashion?
I think so. I mean, actually, the other problem is more that people don't know it's out there, that it exists. They don't know the word adaptive. They just might type in disabled fashion. And then, we do have to combat digital ableism, which is also a problem. And then there's, on top of that, it was me sort of trying to advertise as an adaptive brand, even though I actually use the word universal, which means anyone can wear it. It's only the seated trousers that are very specific to wheelchair users. Anything else anyone can wear, but as soon as non-disabled people see the word disabled, they switch off. So technically I could sell to both markets, and it should be alongside, it shouldn't be othered and separate to, which is why I use universal design. But we still have that problem of people seeing the word disabled and going, oh, it's not for me because I'm not.
It's a very interesting one, but I think something that struck me, again, that you said earlier was that when you get investment, you'll be able to bring that price point down. Now, we know that there are huge barriers to venture capital for women and, again, for disabled people, and, again, as that intersects with other types of diversity. What are some of the challenges that you face there?
Smaller amounts are a bit easier to get, I would say. I think the problem is, and it's one of those terrible things to do as a disability advocate, I make the choice to use my stick or not use a stick to go on a stage. Because I know if I walk on with that stick, there's an immediate, oh dear. And as soon as I use the word adaptive, rather I could just say social impact brand that's sustainable, that's making a difference, which should be enough on its own. But yeah, I have to make a calculated choice depending on who I'm in front of. Do I show up? Because as you say, 1p of every £1 raised through VC funds goes to women. Yeah. How much of that 1p goes to disabled women? There's no data on it, but it is a real struggle.
Yeah. I think it kind of, all of this that we're talking about here, it indicates that there are so many things that need to change. As we said earlier, this is a massive system change that needs to happen. Caroline, this is going to require some radical thinking. What bold moves can fashion leaders be making? How can we push this agenda forward?
Well, just to pick up on the investment point, first of all, is that we started a fund with Venrex, actually, at the end of last year, and one of the first rounds of funding went to a platform that showcases adaptive design, that really thinks about how it can bring on other brands through that. So I think that was a real signal. We're not the ones making the decision where the investment goes. It is, an investment committee. And they saw the opportunity, is that when we talked to them about the first round and different businesses they'd funded, there was one in the metaverse, there was this platform, there were a couple of others. And it was because they clearly had been articulated the opportunity and saw that as a real real platform for investment. So that was a really great signal. So we were delighted that the people we'd partnered with definitely believe in the opportunity. I think from when we think about leaders in industry is that I'm going to sort of take my cue really from the brilliant Sinead Burke, who you referenced, and sort of her approach, which is something that we sort of try to keep going back to, which is education first. There's a big part to play in terms of just education of society, but education within business. So do what you can, learn from the lived experience, think about training for teams, what does that look like, so that there's a very open dialogue around diversity and inclusion within the organisation. To challenge your teams to start to set goals. So, you start the conversation, then start to set goals. What I've seen from our internal working groups is actually they immediately there, because the conversation is front of mind, is that they're wanting to make change because they see an opportunity to do it and they know that they have support of senior management to make those changes. To embed it in your strategy, so it's not a D&I strategy, it's a business strategy, because then it becomes part of the KPIs of the organisation and not just one team. And then to be transparent about what's worked and what hasn't. And I think that's the bit that the fashion industry find really difficult, is that we've always used to presenting sort of the good news. And really, we've got a lot to learn from each other, even if it's just behind closed doors within different organisations, of saying, so did that programme work? And what was the most effective? And what were the challenges that you faced? And how can we learn from each other? That knowledge sharing happens a lot in terms of environmental change. We need to bring that into the D&I space so that we can accelerate our learnings and we're not having to make our own mistakes.
And share learnings between brands as well. So
that's what I was meaning, yeah.
Yeah, people aren't wasting time making the same mistakes as other people. Caroline, can you tell us a bit how valuable 500 has been kind of assessing what your partners are doing and what makes the most impact?
Well, look at these two companies. No, seriously. And I think your point about sharing is so important. I have to say the valuable 500, right back to Jeff's point, we put the accountability into the hands of the CEO. Disability, diversity, belonging, well-being, it can't be in the function of DE&I or just in HR. It's right across all functions of the business. And what made the valuable 500 very unique, it was the CEO who had to make a leadership commitment, regardless of the maturity level of the company on their journey. But it is, I am responsible, I will be accountable, and I will speak to this. And in creating the Valuable 500, can I just tell you, that's a world first. I mean, it's extraordinary. We represent 22 million employees around the world in 64 sectors and 41 countries. It's huge. So what do you do with that? So now that we've done this, what do you do? Well, the most important thing is, to your point, it's collective action and sharing best practice. So we had 500 companies and 500 CEOs doing different things. Now, can you just imagine for a second how we could trigger system change if we got our 500 companies working in a synchronized way, collectively on some of these issues? Reporting, for example. Self-ID, thank you for speaking about your dyslexia. You're a senior in a position and you're speaking to it. Representation, front and behind the camera. What would that look like? That's when we see collective action, because not one person, not one organization, not one industry can change this. It needs collective. And you're so right, all of these issues are complicated. But I want to come to something that Victoria said. June Sarpong said, about a year ago, we were speaking about representation in the creative industry. And she took this issue, she was saying, when somebody is pregnant and they say, is it going to be a boy or a girl? And then people turn and say, oh, we don't mind as long as it's healthy. Well, on the other side of healthy is often considered to be disability and disabled. I mean, here we are, and here we sit. And I think the point about that is, to your point of adaptive fashion, it is universal fashion, it is inclusive fashion. So what we need to do, two things: we need to deal with the uncomfortableness that we still have around this issue, that we will all live with it, but we then need to use our business systems and the courage and the insight and the innovation together to break that system down. Because for me, difference differentiates. And let's be honest, that's what our brands want to do. And disability is an opportunity for insight and innovation, whether it's in clothing or it's in tech. And I often say this, the remote control was designed for blind people to watch TV, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but it's a universal design principle. So for us, the Valuable 500 are focusing right now on 3 areas, which is leadership, which is representation, and which is reporting, and working with the next generation to kind of fuel that up. So yeah, I'm excited. I choose to be excited.
We could all use a lot of excitement and optimism. As we've heard, this is a big challenge. It's a lot of things to change. We're going to need that energy going forward. Geoffrey, I want to come to you next. Amputee model Iona Hay was the star of your latest campaign. The shoot gained 46,000 likes on Instagram. It was a huge success. Can you tell us more about this campaign and what you've learned that might be useful for other fashion brands who are thinking about running a disability inclusive campaign?
So that campaign, so I was talking about something else that we've done actually yesterday, and all of our campaigns are kind of done in a really interesting way. So the team, as I said, think about how they can represent modern Britain and how do we create opportunities to kind of highlight different people in different spaces in different ways. It kind of goes back to our values and what Thomas Burberry stood for, which has been open and caring and innovative. And so this campaign was born out of that thinking around what does the brand stand for. I think what we've learned about these campaigns as we've done them is that people want to be seen, and us giving them that platform to be seen actually opens the doors to conversations about what do we stand for, and it actually kind of signposts people to the fact that Burberry cares about a multitude of communities. So I think for us, the learning has been, how do we continue to do this authentically and not just kind of be like, hey, we just need some models and we're going to stick people in places just because. It's kind of, how does it align back to our values? How does it align back to our mission? And I think, the numbers and likes, yeah, that's great, but it's more, giving platform, giving voice, giving agency to this conversation. I think that's what we're learning. There's so much more that we need to do, and I think, it's kind of leaning into what Caroline was just speaking about and really kind of getting everyone behind it. But that kind of signposting, I think, is the opportunity that we know we have and that we can lean into authentically.
And it's so powerful when a huge fashion company does this, because fashion is fundamentally a creative industry, and there is power in the imagery, the communications that fashion puts out. The industry has power to influence what's deemed aspirational, what's deemed beautiful, who we should include and exclude, and that has been dictated by the fashion industry for years. And so when a company like Burberry or Kurt Geiger does this, it will have a ripple effect.
Most definitely. I think it is that piece of, as we think about what is aspirational, it's the world is shifting and changing. So, who we spoke to 20 years ago, in reality, they don't exist. So we need to kind of evolve with the times. And I think is the fascinating piece of this work and the exciting part of the challenge of including this narrative in everything that we do, because it's that piece of, as the world shifts, more people are going to have different needs. I think, there's also the piece of all of us having to relearn things. And I was, every time I speak to everyone, I say, we all have our limited kind of bubble that we live within. And, the value of what we do within our organisations is helping people break those bubbles so they actually see society beyond their four walls. And I think that's also, the important part of this work and the things that we need to do.
Absolutely. Now, Pascale, I'm going to come back to you, because Kurt Geiger's People Empowered campaign also kind of provides a platform for individuals who've previously been underrepresented to share their stories, to educate consumers about a wide range of disabilities, because, as we've said, having diversity within the disability space is also very important. What advice would you give to other industry thought leaders who want to attract disabled talent as well as disabled customers?
I think there's a lot of things to consider, but firstly, it's to be genuine in your commitment. And I think I'm only echoing what most of us have said, and that is very important. You need to take time to engage with the community that you want to basically support or want to invite as part of your organization. And you should not be scared of understanding that you're here to learn, and you need to accept that to learn, you need to ask questions. That's the first thing. For people empowered, it's been a learning journey, and we've been working hand in hand with the people we've been celebrating. Nothing has been our own decision. We actually have asked the young individual how they want their stories to be told, how they want to be styled, what are they comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. They are really, really part of the campaign, not just in front of the camera, but in creating and building and constructing that campaign always. So I think that's very important to make sure that it's two ways. And then I will say that you need to work and learn from some organization like Valuable 500. They will help you reflect on your organizations, how to best push for change within your sector. I think, when you start having discussion with Valuable 500, it will give confidence to any thought leader in any industries. It's to be open to wanting to push change and ask questions and try to basically, we are part of an ecosystem of organization, true insiders like Valuable 500. Let's use that ecosystem to, your best to learn and try to understand what you can do within your own organization. It's to really share the knowledge and collaborate and learn from each other.
Can I add one thing, actually? Absolutely. So I would say, also remember that the people with disabilities are already in your business.
Yes.
They're already
exactly.
there.
Exactly.
And it's like you have to basically go out and collect that insight and that data and ask the questions and tell people that you see them and you hear them and you want to support them to do the best work they can do within your organization. Because I think sometimes we kind of always look outside of the business and say, hey, let's bring in young people to experience the world of work, and forget everybody that's already there. And I think it's important to kind of do both, to remember the people in the business already and also then reach out.
And can I just say thank you for saying that? It's so important, because 80% of disability is invisible. And what we estimate at the moment is anything between 12 to 14% of most of our companies' employees have lived experience and they're not disclosing. And this is where your industry is nearly the unlocker. It's nearly revealing the truth, because if I see myself, then I will feel it's okay to disclose, right? Because I'm safe to do that. Thank you for saying it, because it's there, it's in the business, and that's the greatest chance that we have to break the silence on disability in business, is to release the truth. And fashion and the creative industry is the greatest permission giver, because I want to be seen. That's why you called it Unhidden. I hid my disability for 11 years for fear of what that was going to do. And what we give in this industry is the greatest chance for everybody to be seen and to be heard and to write that story. So there's a very emotional part of your industry, and that is so empowering to other industries. And that's why it's such an important moment to be having this conversation today.
I do just want to jump in with, absolutely, I agree with that. The problem we have with self-identifying is it safe?
Yeah.
The internal culture has to improve. I on purpose used to write chronically ill instead of disabled on my CVs. I wouldn't have been hired for most of the jobs had I used the word disabled. So we need to look more at how, because people do have disabled people within their organisations, but is it safe for them to say that? Which is why I think a more universal approach of what are your access needs to everybody, because someone might have just lost a parent, they've just had a new baby, they're puppy training, they might have a different access need, and just by accommodating everybody, you're then not sort of asking all the disabled people within your community to do the work for you. Not othering them and not outing them, I think is a very delicate, nuanced, intersectional problem. But I think that's why it's going to take that bit longer for people to feel really safe to admit that they are disabled within communities, and to then not be held up as sort of the poster boys within that company and sort of added to meetings because they are disabled, not based on their talent. I think that's the really important thing. It's talent first, disability second.
And I think sometimes, for me, I'm dyslexic, and as I said, I didn't think I had a disability. That it took me a long time to get to the point of, oh, actually I have a disability, because I'd never write anywhere, didn't talk about it. I think I talk about it now because of the job that I do, but I think previously I'd just kind of be like, oh yeah, I can't spell great, and carry on doing whatever I was doing. So I think I kind of agree with your point of the piece of not getting the people that are living with the disabilities to suddenly become the poster child, but actually really doing the work to kind of recognise and build the education and build the understanding and build the space for everyone to be like, this is what I need to do my job, and it may have to be adaptable. So yeah.
But that's why leaders speaking to their experience is the beginning part of a culture where I might feel safe.
Yeah.
Because it's not safe right now. So when you stand up and say, this is my experience, that does change things. Because 7% of our CEOs have lived experience of disability and 4 out of 5 of them are not disclosing it. What does that say to safety, right?
Yeah.
So it's a massive culture shift.
And I suppose it's also partly about humanising everyone in a workforce,
Yeah.
acknowledging that people are not machines, that the people turning up to do a job are people with needs and with desires and interests outside of their work, and you want to be able to bring yourself to work however much you choose to bring, and you want to feel safe doing that. And I think that's maybe a part of the conversation in adaptive that often gets left out, that, as you said earlier, Victoria, this isn't just about helping disabled people. This is a universal shift that will help everybody. It shouldn't be a siloed issue. Now, we've heard a lot of statistics, but I'm going to throw some more at you. So, reportedly, the disabled community spends $1.7 trillion every year. In the UK alone, businesses lose an estimated £2 billion every month by ignoring the disabled market. And Forbes recently undertook research which found that $10 billion in funding and spending in the US and Canada alone will be migrating over the next 10 years to the businesses which take accessibility seriously in their design. Now, from a global perspective, Caroline, where do you see the future of disability inclusion when it comes to fashion?
Well, I don't have a glass ball.
But if you did, let's speculate.
I want to go back to something that I said previously. I think difference differentiates. I actually think that's the really exciting piece. With different lived experiences, what can we do with the creative industry? I mean, this is the exciting place. This is where there is so much untapped, gorgeous, unique viewpoints that can be in our creative industry, in our clothing. I mean, I'm sitting beside somebody, so I do think actually this is one of the industries that we can see something exciting happening quicker maybe than others. When we started the Valuable 500, I don't want to be negative, but the fashion brands were the kind of slowest to come in. And it was hard because we knew we really wanted the creative industry and we wanted to have fashion. That being said, in the last 18 months to 2 years, the fashion industry, people like you leading, oh my gosh, they're moving the dial fast. So you've got to remember in 2016 when Tommy Hilfiger launched his adaptive range, because he had disability in his family, that was like, oh my God, like that's so niche, right? But now look at this conversation. I actually think this is going to be a point of creativity. Disability brings beautiful creativity, and I think this industry will probably lead other industries because right at the design, it's universal design, which you talk to. And I think this is the exciting point. But we need the leadership, not just in the creatives. We need British Fashion Council doing this stuff. We need the data. And I need you to talk to all of those ones and sharing it. Because collectively, we've got to fail. Okay, we've got to fail to learn. And I'm just going to end on my favourite Leonard Cohen quote is, forget your perfect offering, right? Forget being perfect, because it's the cracks where the light gets in. Let's look at the failures and what it delivers for us creatively. And that's where I see the opportunity, because we're having the uncomfortable conversations and we're willing to show what the beautiful side of that is.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to end on. Thank you, everyone, for all of your incredible insights and for coming to this with such honesty and vulnerability. It's very much appreciated, and I hope everyone at home has enjoyed it as well. Thank you.